Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're studying economics or just curious about how inflation and deflation work, you're in the right place. In today's video, we are going to dive into some multiple choice questions on these two key concepts in economics. We will be breaking down each question, explaining why the correct answer is right, and also showing you why the other options don't quite make the cut. By the end of this video, you will have a clearer understanding of how inflation and deflation affect the economy, and hopefully, it will help you sharpen your knowledge for exams or just to better grasp these concepts in real-world situations. So grab your notes, get comfortable, and let's get started. Starting with the first question. In a country, inflation is 10% and nominal interest rates are 7%. Which group is most likely to benefit from this situation? A. Borrowers. B. Employers. C. Lenders. D. Savers. This question is from year 2022 May-June version 3 paper. The correct answer for this question is option A. In this scenario, inflation is 10%, while nominal interest rates are 7%. This means the real interest rate, nominal interest rate minus inflation rate, is negative. Real interest rate equals 7% minus 10% equals minus 3%. A negative real interest rate implies that the purchasing power of money decreases over time for those who lend or save money at a lower rate than inflation. Now let's analyze each option. For A. Borrowers, they will benefit in this scenario because they repay their loans with money that has less purchasing power than when they borrowed it. Essentially, the debt is cheaper in real terms. Option B. Employers are not directly affected in terms of benefit or loss from interest rates. It depends on other factors like wage adjustments and production costs in relation to inflation. Option C. Lenders lose out in this scenario because the value of the money they receive back is less in real terms due to the negative real interest rate. Lastly, option D. Savers are also disadvantaged as their saved money loses purchasing power over time if interest rates do not keep up with inflation. Moving to the second question. Why might the macroeconomic aim of full employment conflict with the aim of stable prices? A. Full employment leads to higher cost of imports. B. Full employment leads to increased income inequality. C. Full employment leads to increases in wages. D. Full employment leads to lower exports. This question is from year 2022 May-June version 3 paper. The conflict between full employment and stable prices arises because, when an economy is at or near full employment, there is often increased demand for goods and services. This higher demand can lead to demand pull inflation, putting upward pressure on prices. Additionally, as more workers are employed, the competition for labor can drive up wages, which in turn increases production costs and can contribute to cost-push inflation. Now, when we analyze each option. Option A, full employment leads to higher cost of imports, is not directly related to the conflict between full employment and stable prices, as the cost of imports is more influenced by exchange rates and international market conditions than by domestic employment levels. Next, option B, full employment leads to increased income inequality. Full employment generally reduces income inequality by providing jobs for more people, so this option does not describe a conflict with stable prices. Next, option C, full employment leads to increases in wages. When employment is high, labor demand often increases, which can push wages up. Higher wages can increase costs for businesses, which may pass these costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices, leading to inflation. This is a direct conflict with the goal of stable prices. Lastly, option D, full employment leads to lower exports, does not directly relate to inflation or stable prices. While a very strong economy might lead to an appreciation of the currency and potentially reduce exports, this is not a primary conflict with price stability. So, the correct answer for this question is option C, full employment leads to increases in wages. Moving to the third question. A government significantly increases its spending on education and training over several years. What will be the likely effect of this policy measure on the rate of inflation in both the short run and the long run? This question is from year 2022 May-June version 3 paper. Here, let us first analyze the impact of increased government spending on education and training on inflation in both the short run and the long run. In short-run effect, when the government increases spending on education and training, there is an initial rise in demand in the economy as funds are allocated to educational institutions, infrastructure, and personnel. This increased spending can have a demand pull effect, potentially leading to higher inflation in the short run as overall demand increases before any productivity gains are realized. For the long-run effect, in the long run, education and training investments improve the skills and productivity of the workforce. A more productive labor force can produce goods and services more efficiently, which tends to increase the economy's productive capacity. This can help to reduce inflationary pressures over time, as higher productivity can lead to lower costs and potentially lower prices. So, we can say that the likely effects are that short-run effect increases due to demand pull inflation from higher government spending, and long-run effect decreases as productivity improves and reduces inflationary pressures. So, the correct answer for this question is option C, increases, decreases. Moving to the fourth question. In a country, there is an increase in the rate of interest to prevent inflation. Which type of macroeconomic policy is this? A. Fiscal policy. B. Monetary policy. C. Supply-side policy. D. Trade policy. This question is from year 2022 May-June version 3 paper. An increase in the interest rate is a measure aimed at reducing inflation by making borrowing more expensive and encouraging saving. This typically slows down consumer spending and investment, which can help control inflation. This type of policy falls under monetary policy, as it involves the central bank's control over interest rates and the money supply to influence economic activity. So the correct answer for this question is option B. Analyzing the other options. Option A, fiscal policy, involves government spending and taxation, not adjustments to interest rates. Next, option C, supply-side policy, aims to increase the productive capacity of the economy through measures like improving labor productivity or incentivizing investment, rather than controlling inflation through interest rates. Lastly, option D, trade policy, involves tariffs, quotas, and regulations on international trade, and does not focus on interest rates. Moving to the fifth question. A country wishes to reduce the level of inflation. Which combination of policy measures will be most successful? This question is from year 2022 May-June version 2 paper. To reduce the level of inflation, a country would typically adopt contractionary monetary and fiscal policies to reduce overall demand in the economy. Let us analyze the effects of each policy measure. First, increasing interest rates. Higher interest rates discourage borrowing and encourage saving, which tends to reduce consumer spending and business investment. This helps reduce demand pull inflation by lowering overall demand in the economy. Secondly, decreasing government spending. Reducing government spending is a contractionary fiscal policy. Lower government spending reduces the money circulating in the economy, which can also help to decrease demand and thus ease inflationary pressures. Now we can analyze each combination of policy measures. Option A, decrease exchange rates and increase interest rates. Lowering the exchange rate would make imports more expensive, potentially increasing inflation. This is not ideal for reducing inflation. Option B, decrease interest rates and increase exchange rates. Lowering interest rates would increase borrowing and spending, likely fueling inflation rather than reducing it. Option C, increase government spending and decrease interest rates. Both policies would increase demand, leading to higher inflation, so this combination would not be effective. Lastly, option D, increase interest rates and decrease government spending. This combination would be the most effective, as both measures reduce overall demand, helping to control inflation. The correct answer for this question is option D, increase interest rates and decrease government spending. Moving to the sixth question. Why would an increase in the interest rate potentially lead to lower inflation? A. Consumers will be more willing to save when interest rates are high. B. Consumers will be more willing to spend when interest rates are high. C. Producers will be more willing to borrow from banks when interest rates are high. D. Producers will be more willing to invest when interest rates are high. This question is from year 2022 May-June version 1 paper. An increase in the interest rate typically leads to lower inflation because higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive and saving more attractive. This reduces consumer spending and business investment, which in turn lowers overall demand in the economy. When demand decreases, there is less upward pressure on prices, which helps to control inflation. Analyzing the given options. Option A, consumers will be more willing to save when interest rates are high, is correct. Higher interest rates incentivize consumers to save rather than spend, reducing demand and helping to control inflation. Option B, consumers will be more willing to spend when interest rates are high, is incorrect. Higher interest rates discourage spending as borrowing becomes more expensive and saving becomes more attractive. Option C, producers will be more willing to borrow from banks when interest rates are high, is incorrect. Higher interest rates make borrowing more costly, so producers are generally less willing to borrow. Lastly, option D, producers will be more willing to invest when interest rates are high, is incorrect. Higher interest rates make investments more costly to finance, so producers are typically less likely to invest. Moving to the seventh question. Which combination is necessary for the construction of a consumer prices index? This question is from year 2022 May-June version 1 paper. The correct answer for this question is option B. To construct a consumer prices index, CPI, certain key components are necessary. A base year is used as a reference point to compare price changes over time. It provides a starting point for calculating percentage changes in the price level. Next, weights are crucial because they reflect the relative importance of different goods and services in the typical consumer spending. Items that represent a larger portion of consumer spending have higher weights. And price data for various items. Price data is needed to track the changes in prices for each item in the index. So, looking at the given options in the context of what is required for a CPI. Base year, yes, necessary. Price stability, no, price stability is not required to construct the index. The CPI is used to measure changes in price levels, whether stable or not. Weights, yes, necessary to accurately reflect consumer spending patterns. This aligns with option B given. Moving to the eighth question. The graph shows what happened to the rate of inflation in Chad for the period from March to December. Which statement about the general price level in Chad over this period is correct? A. It was at its highest in March. B. It was at its lowest in October. C. It was at its lowest in December. D. It was unchanged between March and April. This question is from year 2022 February-March version 2 paper. The correct answer for this question is option C. It was lowest in December. Moving to the ninth question. What is always indicated by an increase in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI? A. An increase in consumer spending in an economy. B. An increase in living standards. C. An increase in the average cost of living. D. An increase in the purchasing power of money. This question is from year 2021 October-November version 3 paper. The correct answer for this question is option C. An increase in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, indicates a rise in the average price level of goods and services consumed by households over time. This increase reflects a higher cost of living, meaning that consumers must spend more to maintain the same standard of living. It does not necessarily indicate changes in spending levels, living standards, or purchasing power directly, but rather a change in the general price level. Analyzing the other options. Option A. An increase in consumer spending in an economy, not necessarily. An increase in the CPI only indicates that prices have risen, not that consumers are spending more. In fact, higher prices could lead to reduced consumer spending. Next, option B. An increase in living standards is also incorrect. An increase in the CPI does not imply that living standards have improved. In fact, if prices are rising faster than incomes, living standards might decline. Lastly, option D. An increase in the purchasing power of money is also incorrect. An increase in the CPI actually indicates a decrease in the purchasing power of money, as consumers can buy less with the same amount of money. Moving to the 10th question. An economy is operating with all resources fully employed. Which would be an outcome of a significant increase in government expenditure? A. Deflation. B. Demand pull inflation. C. Falling output. D. Increased employment. This question is from year 2021 October-November version 1 paper. The correct answer for this question is option B. When an economy is operating with all resources fully employed, it is already at or near its maximum productive capacity. In this situation, a significant increase in government expenditure would lead to higher overall demand without any capacity to increase output, as all resources, labor, capital, etc., are fully utilized. This excess demand typically results in demand pull inflation as prices increase to balance the excess demand against the fixed supply. Analyzing the other options. Option A. Deflation, a general decrease in price levels, is unlikely when demand increases significantly in a fully employed economy. Instead, prices are more likely to rise. Next, option C. Falling output, with all resources already fully employed, output would not fall, it is more likely to remain constant at its full capacity. Lastly, option D. Increased employment, since all resources, including labor, are already fully employed, there is no additional capacity to increase employment significantly. Moving to the 11th question. Why is weighting used in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI? A. To ensure that all items in the index are treated equally. B. To ensure that all price changes are included in the index. C. To ensure that the index includes changes in the quantity consumed. D. To ensure that the index reflects the spending patterns of consumers. This question is from year 2021 October-November version 1 paper. The correct answer for this question is option D. Weighting is used in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, to reflect the relative importance of different goods and services in the typical consumer spending. Items that represent a larger share of consumer spending are given higher weights, ensuring that the CPI reflects actual spending patterns. This means that price changes in more commonly purchased or higher spending items have a greater impact on the CPI than those in less frequently purchased or lower spending items. Analyzing the options given. Option A. To ensure that all items in the index are treated equally, is incorrect. Weighting is used specifically so that items are not treated equally, but rather according to their importance in consumer spending. Next, option B. To ensure that all price changes are included in the index, is also incorrect. Weighting does not determine which price changes are included, it adjusts the impact of price changes based on spending importance. Next, option C. To ensure that the index includes changes in the quantity consumed, is also incorrect. The CPI generally tracks price changes, not changes in the quantity consumed. Lastly, option D. To ensure that the index reflects the spending patterns of consumers, is correct. Weighting is applied to represent the typical consumer spending habits, so the CPI accurately reflects changes in the cost of living based on what consumers actually buy. Moving to the 12th question. An economy recorded a second month of deflation. What does this mean? A. It was facing a recession. B. Price levels were falling. C. Total demand was rising. D. Unemployment was falling. This question is from year 2021 October-November version 2 paper. Deflation refers to a decrease in the general price level of goods and services in an economy. When an economy experiences deflation for 2 consecutive months, it means that the overall prices of goods and services are declining. Analyzing the given options. Option A. It was facing a recession. While deflation can be associated with a recession, it does not necessarily mean that the economy is in a recession. Deflation can occur for various reasons and does not directly indicate economic growth or contraction. Option B, price levels were falling, is correct. A second month of deflation explicitly indicates that price levels are decreasing over that period. Option C, total demand was rising, is incorrect. Rising total demand typically leads to inflation, not deflation. If demand were rising, we would expect prices to increase rather than decrease. Lastly, option D, unemployment was falling, is also incorrect. While falling unemployment might accompany certain economic conditions, it is not directly indicated by deflation. In fact, deflation can often correlate with higher unemployment rates. The correct answer for this question is option B, price levels were falling. Moving to the 13th question. What is a cause of demand pull inflation? A. A surplus of skilled labor. B. Higher government expenditure. C. Higher tax rates. D. Lower net exports. This question is from year 2021 October-November version 2 paper. The correct answer for this question is option B, higher government expenditure. Demand pull inflation occurs when the overall demand for goods and services in an economy exceeds its productive capacity, leading to upward pressure on prices. One of the primary causes of demand pull inflation is higher government expenditure, which can increase aggregate demand in the economy. When the government spends more, it can stimulate consumption and investment, leading to an increase in demand for goods and services. If this demand exceeds supply, inflation can occur. Looking at the other options. Option A, a surplus of skilled labor, would likely lead to lower wages and less inflationary pressure, not demand pull inflation. Option C, higher tax rates, would generally reduce consumer spending and investment, leading to lower demand and less inflation, not more. Lastly, option D, lower net exports, a reduction in net exports, exports minus imports, would decrease overall demand in the economy, which would likely reduce inflationary pressures rather than cause demand pull inflation. Moving to the 14th question. How is the rate of inflation measured? A. By calculating the change in the price of goods and services from one year to the next. B. By calculating the real value of all output of goods and services in an economy. C. By calculating the total number of people willing and able to work but cannot find work. D. By calculating the total value of exports minus the total value of imports. This question is from year 2021 October-November version 2 paper. The correct answer for this question is option A, by calculating the change in the price of goods and services from one year to the next. Inflation is typically measured by observing the percentage change in the price level of a basket of goods and services over time. The most common measures of inflation are the Consumer Price Index, CPI, or the Producer Price Index, PPI. These indices track how the prices of goods and services change over a specified period, usually annually or monthly. Option A, by calculating the change in the price of goods and services from one year to the next, is the correct answer because it reflects how inflation is measured, by comparing the prices of a fixed basket of goods and services in one period to another. Analyzing the other options. Option B, by calculating the real value of all output of goods and services in an economy, refers to real GDP, which adjusts for inflation, but it is not how inflation itself is measured. Option C, by calculating the total number of people willing and able to work but cannot find work, refers to unemployment, not inflation. Lastly, option D. By calculating the total value of exports minus the total value of imports, this refers to the trade balance, net exports, not inflation. Moving to the 15th question. In a year, 2 changes occurred in a company. Company directors' salaries increased by 15%. Office workers' wages increased by 5%. The rate of inflation was 3.4%. What happened to real income? This question is from year 2021 May-June version 3 paper. The correct answer for this question is option D, rose. Company directors' real income. Nominal salary increase, 15%. Inflation rate, 3.4%. To calculate the real income change. Real income change equals 15% minus 3.4% equals 11.6%. Since the company director's salary increase, 15%, is greater than the inflation rate, 3.4%, company director's real income rose. Now, coming to office workers' real income. Nominal wage increase, 5%, and inflation rate, 3.4%. So, for office workers, real income change equals 5% minus 3.4% equals 1.6%. The nominal wage increase, 5%, is still greater than the inflation rate, 3.4%, so office workers' real income also rose, though by a smaller amount than that of the company directors. Hence, company directors' real income rose by 11.6% after adjusting for inflation. And office workers' real income rose by 1.6% after adjusting for inflation. Thus, the correct answer for this question is option D, rose. Moving to the 16th question. The table shows changes in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, from the base year, 1, and for the next 3 years. Which statement is correct? A. Consumer prices were highest in year 3. B. The rate of inflation was 2.1% in year 4. C. The rate of inflation was highest in year 2. D. The rate of inflation was lowest in year 1. This question is from year 2021 May-June version 2 paper. Let's go through each option systematically, using the provided CPI data. In year 1, CPI equals 100, this is the base year. In year 2, CPI equals 101.1. In year 3, CPI equals 101.8. And in year 4, CPI equals 102.1. Now, we can calculate the rate of inflation for each year as the percentage change in CPI compared to the previous year. Rate of inflation calculation. From year 1 to year 2, the inflation rate equals 101.1-100 divided by 100, which is equals 1.1%. From year 2 to year 3, the inflation rate equals 101.8 minus 101.1 divided by 101.1 equals 0.69%. From year 3 to year 4, the inflation rate equals 102.1 minus 101.8 divided by 101.8 equals 0.29%. Analyzing the given options. Option A, consumer prices were highest in year 3, is incorrect because the CPI is highest in year 4, CPI equals 102.1, not in year 3, CPI equals 101.8. Option B. The rate of inflation was 2.1% in year 4, is incorrect. The inflation rate from year 3 to year 4 is 0.29%, not 2.1%. Option C. The rate of inflation was highest in year 2, is correct. The inflation rate from year 1 to year 2 was 1.1%, which is the highest of the 3 years. Lastly, option D. The rate of inflation was lowest in year 1, is incorrect because there was no inflation in year 1, it is the base year with a CPI of 100. So the correct answer for this question is option C. Moving to the 17th question. What is likely to happen when a country is experiencing deflation? A. Consumers delay spending. B. Governments raise interest rates. C. The level of imports increases. D. The real value of money falls. This question is from year 2021 May-June version 2 paper. When a country is experiencing deflation, the general level of prices is falling. This can have various economic consequences, and we need to look at each option to determine what is most likely to happen in such a situation. Analyzing all the given options. Option A, consumers delay spending, is correct. When deflation occurs, consumers may expect prices to fall further in the future. As a result, they might delay their purchases in anticipation of even lower prices. This can reduce demand in the economy, further contributing to deflationary pressures. Next, option B, governments raise interest rates, is unlikely. In a deflationary environment, governments or central banks are more likely to lower interest rates to encourage spending and investment, as lower interest rates make borrowing cheaper. Raising interest rates would likely worsen deflation by discouraging spending and investment. Next, option C. The level of imports increases, is not necessarily true. In a deflationary environment, if domestic prices are falling, consumers might prefer to buy domestically produced goods, which can reduce the demand for imports. Additionally, if the country is experiencing deflation due to economic weakness, it may not have the purchasing power to increase imports. Lastly, option D. The real value of money falls, is also incorrect. During deflation, the real value of money actually increases, because the purchasing power of money rises as prices fall. Deflation means you can buy more goods and services with the same amount of money, not less. So the correct answer for this question is option A. Moving to the 18th question. This is a repeated question, we just saw this. Moving to the 19th question. A country's inflation rate, measured by the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, was 3% in year 1. 3 years later, it was 0.8%. What can be concluded from this information? A. Prices are falling. B. The rate of price increases is falling. C. The real rate of interest is negative. D. There is increased purchasing power for those on fixed incomes. This question is from year 2021 May-June version 1 paper. Given the information, the inflation rate in year 1 was 3%. And the inflation rate 3 years later was 0.8%. Now let us go through each option to determine what can be concluded. Option A, prices are falling, is incorrect. Inflation measures the rate of price increase, not price levels themselves. While the inflation rate has decreased, it does not mean that prices are falling, it just means that the rate at which prices are increasing has slowed. A 0.8% inflation rate indicates that prices are still rising, just at a slower rate than before. Coming to option B. The rate of price increases is falling, is correct. The inflation rate has decreased from 3% to 0.8%. Which means the rate of price increases has slowed down. This is the most accurate interpretation of the information given. Next, option C. The real rate of interest is negative. Cannot be concluded directly from the information given. The real rate of interest is the difference between the nominal interest rate and the inflation rate. The problem does not provide any information about the nominal interest rate, so we cannot determine whether the real rate of interest is negative. Lastly, option D. There is increased purchasing power for those on fixed incomes. Is likely, but not a direct conclusion from the given data. While it is true that slower inflation, or lower inflation, may lead to increased purchasing power for those on fixed incomes, the problem doesn't explicitly mention fixed incomes or discuss how the 0.8% inflation rate is affecting individuals directly. However, it is a reasonable assumption that if inflation is lower, the purchasing power of those on fixed incomes would likely improve, as the cost of living is increasing more slowly. So, the correct answer for this question is option B. The rate of price increases is falling. This directly matches the information that the inflation rate has decreased from 3% to 0.8%, indicating a slowdown in the rate at which prices are increasing. Moving to question number 20. What will deflation most likely lead to? A. A fall in the real value of debts. B. An increase in the exchange rate. C. An increase in the rate of interest. D. An increase in the real purchasing power of money. This question is from year 2021 May-June version 1 paper. Deflation refers to a decrease in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over time. Let us now analyze each option to determine what is most likely to happen during a period of deflation. Option A. A fall in the real value of debts is incorrect. Deflation actually increases the real value of debts. When the price level falls, the amount of money owed, the nominal debt, remains the same, but the value of money rises, meaning the debtor has to pay back more in real terms. In other words, deflation makes it harder for borrowers to repay their debts because they are paying with money that is worth more. Next, option B. An increase in the exchange rate is not necessarily true. Deflation might not directly lead to an increase in the exchange rate, the value of the country's currency in foreign exchange markets. In fact, deflation could put downward pressure on the exchange rate if it signals weak economic conditions or lower demand for a country's goods and services. However, the relationship between deflation and exchange rates is complex and depends on other factors, such as interest rates and investor confidence. Coming to option C. An increase in the rate of interest is unlikely. During deflation, central banks often lower interest rates to encourage spending and investment, as lower interest rates make borrowing cheaper. Increasing the rate of interest would typically be a response to inflation, not deflation. Central banks try to avoid deflationary spirals, so they would likely reduce interest rates to stimulate the economy. Lastly, option D. An increase in the real purchasing power of money is correct. Deflation increases the real purchasing power of money because prices are falling. When the price of goods and services decreases, the same amount of money can buy more than before, meaning the value of money, its purchasing power, rises. So, the correct answer for this question is option D, an increase in the real purchasing power of money. During deflation, money's purchasing power rises because prices are falling, allowing consumers and businesses to buy more with the same amount of money. Moving to question 21. The table shows the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, of a country for 5 years. Which statement about the country is correct? A. It faced deflation in year 2. B. It faced deflation in year 3. C. It faced inflation in year 4. D. It faced inflation in year 5. This question is from year 2021 May-June version 3 paper. We know that inflation occurs when the CPI increases, prices are rising. And deflation occurs when the CPI decreases, prices are falling. Now, let us assess each option. Option A. It faced deflation in year 2. Is incorrect. From year 1, CPI equals 100, to year 2, CPI equals 120, the CPI increased, meaning there was inflation in year 2, not deflation. For option B. It faced deflation in year 3. Is incorrect. From year 2, CPI equals 120, to year 3, CPI equals 135, the CPI increased again, indicating inflation in year 3, not deflation. For option C. It faced inflation in year 4, is correct. From year 3, CPI equals 135, to year 4, CPI equals 140, the CPI increased, meaning the country faced inflation in year 4. Lastly, option D. It faced inflation in year 5. Is incorrect. From year 4, CPI equals 140, to year 5, CPI equals 138, the CPI decreased, indicating that deflation occurred in year 5, not inflation. So, the correct answer for this question is option C. It faced inflation in year 4. This is the correct statement because the CPI increased from 135 to 140, indicating inflation during year 4. Moving to question 22. What may cause deflation? A. Advances in technology and increases in labor productivity. B. Government using a policy of very low interest rates. C. Increases in the costs of production that reduce firms' profits. D. Increases in the rate of inflation as measured by the CPI. This question is from year 2021 May-June version 3 paper. Let us go through each option to understand what may cause deflation. Option A. Advances in technology and increases in labor productivity is indeed a possible cause of deflation. Advances in technology and increases in labor productivity typically lead to lower costs of production for businesses. As firms are able to produce goods and services more efficiently, they can pass these cost savings on to consumers in the form of lower prices. This can lead to deflation, as the overall price level may fall due to increased supply and lower production costs. Option B, government using a policy of very low interest rates is incorrect. Very low interest rates are generally used to combat deflation or prevent it. Lower interest rates make borrowing cheaper, which encourages spending and investment, thus boosting demand in the economy. This usually leads to inflation, not deflation. Therefore, a policy of very low interest rates is typically not a cause of deflation. Next, option C, increases in the costs of production that reduce firms' profits is unlikely to cause deflation. Increases in the costs of production, e.g., rising wages, raw material costs, would usually lead to inflation, not deflation. When production costs rise, firms may pass on these costs to consumers in the form of higher prices, which leads to inflation, not deflation. Lastly, option D, increases in the rate of inflation as measured by the CPI is also incorrect. An increase in the rate of inflation means that prices are rising at a faster pace. Deflation refers to a decrease in the general price level, not an increase. Therefore, higher inflation is the opposite of deflation. So, the correct answer for this question is option A, advances in technology and increases in labor productivity. These factors can lead to deflation by lowering production costs and increasing supply, which can result in lower prices in the economy. Moving on to question 23. What is included in the construction of the Consumer Prices Index, CPI? A. A base year. B. Incomes. C. Price elasticity of demand. D. Quantity supplied. This question is from year 2021, February-March version 2 paper. The Consumer Prices Index, CPI, is a measure of the average change in prices paid by consumers for a basket of goods and services over time. Let's break down each option to determine what is included in the construction of the CPI. Option A. A base year is the correct answer. The CPI is calculated relative to a base year, which is assigned a value of 100. The index compares current prices to prices in this base year to determine the rate of inflation. So, the base year is crucial in the construction of the CPI. However, let us look at other options as well. Option B, incomes, is incorrect. Incomes are not included in the construction of the CPI. The CPI focuses on price changes for a fixed basket of goods and services, not on the income levels of consumers. However, changes in the CPI can influence real incomes, as rising inflation can erode purchasing power. Option C, price elasticity of demand, is incorrect. Price elasticity of demand refers to the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a good or service to a change in its price. While elasticity can impact consumption patterns, it is not directly used in constructing the CPI, which is based on the prices of goods and services, not the demand response to price changes. Lastly, option D, quantity supplied, is also incorrect. The CPI is not based on the quantity supplied of goods and services. It tracks changes in the prices paid by consumers for a fixed basket of goods and services, not how much is being produced or supplied. So, the correct answer for this question is option A. A base year. The CPI is constructed by comparing the prices of a fixed basket of goods and services in the current year to the prices in the base year, which provides a reference point for measuring inflation. Moving on to question 24. The table shows some data about an economy. What happened in year 1? A. Both prices and real incomes fell. B. Both prices and real incomes rose. C. Prices fell, but real incomes rose. D. Prices rose, but real incomes fell. This question is from year 2021, February-March version 2 paper. Let us first analyze the data provided in the table for year 1. Rate of inflation, 3.5%. And change in personal incomes, 2.5%. We know that inflation refers to the percentage change in the general price level of goods and services in the economy. A positive inflation rate, 3.5% in this case, means that prices have increased. And real incomes adjust for inflation, meaning they reflect the actual purchasing power of personal income. If personal income grows slower than inflation, real incomes fall. If personal income grows faster than inflation, real incomes rise. So, inflation of 3.5% means that, on average, prices have increased by 3.5%. And change in personal incomes of 2.5% means that personal incomes have increased by 2.5%. However, because inflation is higher than the increase in incomes, 3.5% versus 2.5%, the real income, purchasing power, has actually decreased. This concludes that prices rose by 3.5% due to inflation, whereas real incomes fell because the increase in incomes, 2.5%, was less than the increase in prices, 3.5%. So, the correct answer for this question is option D. Prices rose, but real incomes fell. Moving to question 25. Deflation is a sustained fall in the general price level. What might cause deflation? A. Insufficient private capital investment. B. Loss of confidence in the government's economic policies. C. Rising oil prices. D. Shortages of skilled labor in relation to demand. This question is from year 2021, February-March version 2 paper. We know that deflation occurs when there is a sustained decrease in the general price level of goods and services. Now, let us evaluate the options again with a more detailed focus on deflation specifically. Option A. Insufficient private capital investment. While insufficient capital investment can slow down economic growth and reduce the supply of goods and services, this typically leads to lower growth or stagnation rather than outright deflation. It can contribute to lower demand in the economy, but it's not a primary or direct cause of deflation. Option B. Loss of confidence in the government's economic policies is the correct answer. Here, loss of confidence in the government's economic policies can directly contribute to deflation. If businesses and consumers lose confidence in the stability or effectiveness of economic policies, they are less likely to spend and invest. This leads to a reduction in aggregate demand, the total demand for goods and services in the economy. When demand falls significantly, businesses may lower prices to encourage spending, leading to deflation. This is a key mechanism for deflationary spirals: reduced confidence, reduced spending, falling prices, further reduced spending. Next, option C. Rising oil prices typically cause inflation, not deflation. Higher oil prices increase production costs and lead to higher prices for goods and services, cost-push inflation. Therefore, this would not cause deflation. Lastly, option D. Shortages of skilled labor in relation to demand is more likely to lead to wage inflation, as businesses compete for a limited supply of skilled labor. In a growing economy, this could actually contribute to inflation, not deflation. So, the correct answer for this question is option B. Loss of confidence in the government's economic policies. When people lose confidence in the government's economic policies, it leads to reduced spending, lower demand, and a fall in prices, which can cause deflation. Moving to question 26. The table shows the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, of an economy. What can be concluded from the data? A. Prices fell between years 4 and 5. B. Prices rose in every year. C. The rate of inflation rose 5% in year 4. D. There was a fall in living standards by year 5. This question is from year 2021, February-March version 2 paper. The correct answer for this question is option A. Prices fell between years 4 and 5. The CPI in year 4 is 108, and the CPI in year 5 is 106. This indicates a decrease in prices between years 4 and 5, meaning prices fell during this period. This can be confirmed because the CPI value decreased. However, let us also analyze the other options. Option B. Prices rose in every year, is incorrect. While prices generally increased between years 1 to 4, CPI values rise from 100 to 108. In year 5, prices actually fell. CPI dropped from 108 to 106. Therefore, prices did not rise in every year. Next, option C. The rate of inflation rose 5% in year 4. Is incorrect. The rate of inflation is the percentage change in the CPI from one year to the next. From year 3 to year 4, the CPI increased from 104 to 108. The inflation rate equals 108. 104 divided by 104 times 100 equals 3.85%. So, the inflation rate in year 4 was 3.85%, not 5%. Lastly, option D. There was a fall in living standards by year 5. Is not necessarily true. A fall in living standards is not directly implied by the CPI data alone. Although there was a slight decrease in the CPI between years 4 and 5, from 108 to 106, it does not automatically imply a fall in living standards. Other factors, such as wage growth, employment levels, and access to goods and services, also impact living standards. Therefore, we can't directly conclude that living standards fell based only on CPI. Moving to question 27. In the construction of a Consumer Prices Index, CPI, a total weight of 1,000 is used. If a weight of 300 is given to food and a weight of 150 is given to transport, then A. Consumers are spending half as much on transport as they do on food. B. Consumers must be spending more on necessities than on luxury goods. C. Food prices must be rising twice as fast as transport prices. D. The weights cannot be changed until the index reaches 1,000. This question is from year 2020 Specimen Version 1 paper. The correct answer for this question is option A. Consumers are spending half as much on transport as they do on food. We can compare the weights. Food has a weight of 300, and transport has a weight of 150. So, the weight for transport is half of the weight for food, 150 is half of 300, but this does not necessarily mean that consumers are spending half as much on transport. It means that, in the context of the CPI, transport has half the weight of food in the basket, which reflects its relative importance in the overall index. Moving to question 28. Some goods take a greater percentage of a typical household's total spending than others. How is this accounted for in the construction of a Consumer Prices Index? A. By deducting the goods. B. By giving a weight to the goods. C. By taking an average of price fluctuations during a year. D. By using the price elasticity of demand for the goods. This question is from year 2020 October-November Version 1 paper. The correct answer for this question is option B. By giving a weight to the goods. The weights assigned to goods reflect how much of the average household's budget is spent on each category of goods or services. Goods that take up a larger percentage of total spending are given a higher weight in the CPI. This ensures that price changes in more important items, such as food or housing, have a greater impact on the overall index than price changes in less significant items. Analyzing the other options. Option A. By deducting the good is incorrect. Goods are not deducted from the CPI calculation. Instead, the prices of a selection of goods and services are tracked. Goods with a greater share of consumer spending are simply given higher weights, but they are not excluded from the index. Next, option C. By taking an average of price fluctuations during a year is incorrect. While the CPI does track price fluctuations, it does so by looking at price changes for a specific basket of goods that reflects typical household consumption patterns. The index does not just take an average of price changes, but also adjusts for the relative importance of each good through the use of weights. Lastly, option D. By using the price elasticity of demand for the goods is incorrect. The price elasticity of demand, how responsive the quantity demanded is to price changes, is not directly used in the construction of the CPI. The CPI is based on the observed price changes of goods and services and their relative weights, not on the elasticity of demand. Moving to question 29. An economy is experiencing rising prices. Which government policy will help reduce consumer expenditure? A. Introducing compulsory saving for income earners. B. Investing more in building infrastructure. C. Issuing more banknotes and coins. D. Reducing indirect taxes. This question is from year 2020 October-November Version 1 paper. The correct answer for this question is option A. When an economy is experiencing rising prices, inflation, the government may implement policies to reduce consumer expenditure in order to help control inflation. Option A. Introducing compulsory saving for income earners. Here, compulsory saving means that individuals are required by the government to save a portion of their income rather than spending it. This policy would reduce disposable income available for consumption, which could lead to a decrease in consumer spending. This could help reduce demand pull inflation, where excessive demand drives up prices. Analyzing the other options. Option B. Investing more in building infrastructure is unlikely to reduce consumer expenditure directly. While investing in infrastructure can stimulate the economy and create jobs in the long term, it is generally considered an expansionary policy, not a contractionary one. It would likely increase public spending and potentially lead to more disposable income in the economy, which could actually increase consumer spending, not reduce it. Next, option C. Issuing more banknotes and coins would likely increase inflation. Issuing more money, also known as monetary expansion, without a corresponding increase in goods and services can lead to inflation, not a reduction in consumer expenditure. More money in circulation increases demand, which could lead to higher prices rather than reducing spending. This is an expansionary monetary policy, which would likely worsen inflation. Lastly, option D. Reducing indirect taxes would likely increase consumer expenditure. Indirect taxes, such as VAT or sales taxes, are typically added to goods and services. If the government reduces these taxes, it effectively lowers the cost of goods and services, which would encourage more consumer spending rather than reducing it. This policy is generally expansionary and would not help reduce consumer expenditure. Moving on to question 30. What would not be required in the construction of an index of consumer prices? A. The selection of a base year. B. The selection of a representative range of items. C. The calculation of average wage levels. D. The weighting of each item in the index. This question is from year 2020 May-June version 1 paper. To construct a Consumer Prices Index, CPI, the goal is to track changes in the prices of a fixed basket of goods and services over time. Let us evaluate each option to determine what would not be required in constructing such an index. Option A. The selection of a base year is required. A base year is necessary in the construction of a CPI because the index is usually expressed relative to this year. The base year is assigned a value of 100, and the price changes in subsequent years are measured against it. The base year helps determine the relative price changes over time. Next, option B. The selection of a representative range of items is required. A representative range of items is essential for the CPI. The basket of goods and services used in the index needs to reflect the typical consumption patterns of households. This selection ensures the index is representative of actual consumer spending habits. Next, option C. The calculation of average wage levels is not required. The CPI is focused on the price changes of a fixed basket of goods and services, not on wage levels. The calculation of average wage levels may be relevant for understanding real income, adjusting for inflation, but it is not needed to construct the CPI itself. The CPI measures price changes, not income or wages. Lastly, option D. The weighting of each item in the index is required. The weighting of each item in the CPI is critical because it reflects the relative importance of each item in the typical consumer's budget. Items that are purchased more frequently or that take up a larger portion of household spending are given higher weights in the index. Without weighting, the CPI would not accurately reflect how price changes affect the average consumer. So, the correct answer for this question is option C. The calculation of average wage levels. The calculation of average wage levels is not required for constructing the CPI. The CPI focuses on the price changes of goods and services, not on wage data. Wage levels might be used for other purposes, such as calculating real income, income adjusted for inflation, but they are not part of the CPI construction process. Moving to question 31. people's income decreases. How is the proportion spent on food and leisure likely to change? This question is from year 2020 May-June version 1 paper. When people's income decreases, their spending behavior typically adjusts in response to their lower disposable income. Talking about food, it is considered a necessity, meaning it has a relatively inelastic demand. This means that even when income decreases, people will still need to buy food. However, they might not spend as much on higher-end food items and may substitute to cheaper alternatives. As a result, the proportion of income spent on food could increase as a percentage of their total income, because the decrease in income will force people to spend a higher proportion on basic necessities like food. Whereas in leisure, the leisure activities, on the other hand, tend to be more elastic in demand. When people have less money, they are more likely to cut back on discretionary spending, such as entertainment, travel, or luxury leisure activities. As a result, the amount of money spent on leisure is likely to decrease, both in absolute terms and as a proportion of total spending. Hence, when income decreases, people are likely to spend more on food, due to its necessity, and less on leisure, due to its discretionary nature. So, the correct answer for this question is option C: increase, decrease. Moving on to question 32. Real incomes have risen in a country. Which situation would definitely have caused this? This question is from year 2020 May-June version 3 paper. The correct answer for this question is option B. When real incomes rise in a country, it means that people's purchasing power has increased. This can occur if either money incomes increase faster than prices, inflation, or if prices decrease while money incomes remain stable. Let us examine the relationship between real incomes, money incomes, and price levels in more detail. Real income equals money income divided by price level. If money income rises faster than the price level, real incomes increase. If the price level falls, deflation, real income also increases, because people can buy more with the same amount of money. If money income falls, but prices fall even faster, real income may still rise. On evaluating the given options. Option A: fell. If both the price level and money incomes fall, real incomes might not necessarily rise. Real income could rise if the price level falls more than money incomes, but this isn't guaranteed. In many cases, when both fall together, purchasing power doesn't improve significantly. Option B: fell, rose. If the price level falls, deflation, and money incomes rise, this would definitely cause an increase in real incomes. The fall in prices means people can buy more with their incomes, and rising wages increase people's purchasing power. So, this scenario would definitely lead to an increase in real incomes. Option C: rose. If both money incomes and the price level rise, real income may not increase. If prices rise at the same rate or faster than money incomes, purchasing power might not improve. In fact, if the price increase outpaces income growth, real incomes could actually fall. Lastly, option D: rose, fell. If the price level rises, inflation, but money incomes fall, real incomes would definitely fall. This situation is harmful for purchasing power because people's incomes are declining while prices are increasing, leading to a reduction in real income. Hence, the correct answer for this question is option B: fell, rose. In this scenario, money incomes rise and the price level falls. This would definitely lead to a rise in real incomes, because people have more money to spend and prices are lower, improving their purchasing power. Proceeding with question 33. What would not be required in the construction of an index of consumer prices? A: the selection of a base year. B: the selection of a representative range of items. C: the calculation of average wage levels. D: the weighting of each item in the index. This question is from year 2020 May-June version 2 paper. In the construction of an index of consumer prices, such as the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, there are specific elements that are necessary for calculating and tracking changes in the price level of goods and services. Let us review the given options to determine which one is not required in constructing a CPI. Option A: the selection of a base year. is required. A base year is crucial in the construction of an index. It provides a reference point from which price changes are measured. The CPI is usually expressed relative to the base year, which is assigned a value of 100. Price changes in subsequent years are compared to the base year to calculate inflation. Option B. The selection of a representative range of items is required. A representative range of items, or a basket of goods and services, is essential. The CPI measures the price changes of a set of goods and services that are typically purchased by households. This basket must reflect actual consumer spending patterns to accurately track inflation. Option C. The calculation of average wage levels is not required. Average wage levels are not directly involved in the construction of a CPI. While wages may be important in understanding real income adjusted for inflation, they are not part of the calculation of the index itself. The CPI is based on the price changes of goods and services, not wages. Therefore, calculating average wages is not necessary to build the index. Lastly, option D. The weighting of each item in the index is required. Weighting is a key part of the CPI construction. Each item in the basket is assigned a weight based on its relative importance in the typical household's budget. Items that make up a larger portion of consumer spending, e.g., food, housing, are given higher weights. The weights ensure that the index accurately reflects the impact of price changes on the average consumer. So, the correct answer for this question is option C. The calculation of average wage levels. The calculation of average wage levels is not needed for constructing a CPI. The CPI focuses on tracking the price changes of a basket of goods and services, not on income or wage data. Moving to question 34. An increase in which of the following is least likely to cause inflation? A. Consumer spending. B. Government spending. C. Income tax. D. Wages. This question is from year 2020 February-March version 2 paper. To determine which of the following is least likely to cause inflation, we need to understand the relationship between each factor and inflation. Inflation is generally caused by an increase in demand pull inflation, or an increase in production costs, cost push inflation. Let us evaluate each option. Option A, consumer spending, is likely to cause inflation. Higher consumer spending increases aggregate demand for goods and services. When demand exceeds supply, prices tend to rise, causing demand pull inflation. An increase in consumer spending is a common driver of inflation. Option B, government spending, is likely to cause inflation. Increased government spending, especially if funded by borrowing or printing money, can also boost aggregate demand in the economy. This can lead to higher prices, especially if the economy is already near full capacity. Government spending can contribute to demand pull inflation. Option C, income tax, is least likely to cause inflation. Higher income taxes typically reduce disposable income, which leads to a decrease in consumer spending. Lower consumer spending reduces demand in the economy, which would actually put downward pressure on prices and reduce inflationary pressures. In fact, higher taxes are often used to cool down an overheating economy and reduce inflation. Lastly, option D, wages, is likely to cause inflation. Rising wages can lead to cost push inflation if businesses pass on higher labor costs to consumers in the form of higher prices. Additionally, higher wages can increase consumer spending, which may also contribute to demand pull inflation if it boosts aggregate demand. So, the correct answer for this question is option C, income tax. An increase in income tax is least likely to cause inflation because it tends to reduce consumer spending, thereby reducing demand and putting downward pressure on prices. In contrast, the other factors, consumer spending, government spending, and wages, can directly or indirectly increase demand, leading to inflation. Moving to question 35. A person receives annual interest of 4% on their savings. Inflation is 5% per annum. What is the approximate change in the real value of their savings? A. Minus 5%. B. Minus 1%. C. Plus 4%. D. Plus 9%. This question is from year 2020 February-March version 2 paper. To calculate the change in the real value of savings, we need to adjust the nominal interest rate for the effect of inflation. The formula for calculating the real interest rate is as follows. Real interest rate is almost equal to nominal interest rate minus inflation rate. Given nominal interest rate, annual interest on savings, equals 4% and inflation rate equals 5%. So, using the formula for the real interest rate. Real interest rate is almost equal to 4% minus 5% equals minus 1%. This means that after accounting for inflation, the real value of the savings actually decreases by 1% because the rate of inflation is higher than the rate of interest earned on the savings. Hence, the correct answer for this question is option B minus 1%. In this case, the purchasing power of the savings is declining because inflation is outpacing the interest earned. Moving to question 36. Venezuela, a leading world oil producer, has experienced hyperinflation of over 400% per annum in recent years. How does hyperinflation affect an economy? This question is from her 2019 October-November version 2 paper. The correct answer for this question is option D. Moving to question 37. The graph shows the rate of inflation in a country between 2000 and 2014. What can be concluded about average prices? A. They fell throughout the period. B. They peaked in 2000. C. They rose each year. D. They were lower in 2014 than they were in 2010. This question is from 2019 October-November version 3 paper. The correct answer to this question is option C. Moving to question 38. Rates of inflation and deflation are measured using a Consumer Prices Index, CPI, over a period of time. The table shows average rates of CP for Japan from 2010 to 2014. In which period did Japan experience deflation followed by inflation? A. 2010 to 2011. B. 2011 to 2012. C. 2012 to 2013. D. 2013 to 2014. This question is from year 2019 October-November version 1 paper. To identify the period during which Japan experienced deflation followed by inflation, we need to understand the terms deflation and inflation in terms of the Consumer Prices Index, CPI. Deflation is when the CPI decreases, a negative change in CPI, indicating that prices are falling. Inflation is when the CPI increases, a positive change in CPI, indicating that prices are rising. Let us analyze all options. Option A 2010 to 2011, in 2010, CPI change equals minus 0.72, deflation, and in 2011, CPI change equals minus 0.28, deflation. Both years show deflation, so this period is not deflation followed by inflation. For option B, 2011 to 2012, 2011, CPI change equals minus 0.28, deflation, 2012, CPI change equals minus 0.03, deflation. Both years show deflation, so this period is also not deflation followed by inflation. For option C, 2012 to 2013, 2012, CPI change equals minus 0.03, deflation, 2013, CPI change equals 0.36, inflation. This is the period where Japan experienced deflation in 2012, followed by inflation in 2013. Therefore, this is the period we are looking for. Lastly, option D, 2013 to 2014, in 2013, CPI change equals 0.36, inflation, in 2014, CPI change equals 2.75, inflation. Both years show inflation, so this is not the period we are looking for. So, the correct answer for this question is option circa 2012 to 2013. Japan experienced deflation in 2012, CPI change of -0.03, followed by inflation in 2013, CPI change of +0.36. Moving to question 39. A country is experiencing a period of full employment. What is most likely to lead to an increase in demand pull inflation? A. An increase in government spending. B. An increase in imports. C. An increase in income tax rates. D. An increase in sales tax. This question is from year 2019 May-June version 1 paper. In a situation where a country is already experiencing full employment, demand pull inflation occurs when aggregate demand in the economy exceeds the economy's productive capacity, leading to upward pressure on prices. Now, let us analyze the impact of each option in this context. Option A. An increase in government spending directly increases aggregate demand. If the economy is already at full employment, this will lead to further upward pressure on demand, and since the economy cannot produce more goods and services, due to full employment, prices are likely to rise. This is the classic case of demand pull inflation, where demand outstrips supply, causing inflation. Next, option B. An increase in imports would not contribute to demand pull inflation. In fact, increasing imports can relieve domestic demand pressure because imported goods would satisfy some of the demand that would otherwise push up domestic prices. It can actually reduce inflationary pressures if consumers switch to cheaper imported goods. Next, option C. An increase in income tax rates generally reduces disposable income, which in turn reduces consumer spending and overall demand in the economy. With lower demand, inflationary pressures, including demand pull inflation, would likely decrease, not increase. So, this would not lead to an increase in demand pull inflation. Lastly, option D. An increase in sales tax is typically considered a cost push factor, as it raises the cost of goods and services for consumers. This would likely lead to an increase in prices due to higher costs for businesses, but it is not classified as demand pull inflation. This would be more related to cost push inflation, not demand pull inflation. So, the correct answer for this question is option A. An increase in government spending. An increase in government spending would stimulate aggregate demand. When the economy is at full employment, this leads to demand pull inflation, as more money chases the same amount of goods and services, driving prices up. Moving to question 40. The table shows the percentage change from 2015 to 2016 in gross domestic product, GDP, and consumer prices for selected countries. Which country was suffering from economic recession and inflation? This question is from year 2019 May-June version 1 paper. To determine which country was suffering from both economic recession and inflation, we need to look at the following criteria. Economic recession is typically defined as a negative GDP growth rate, a contraction in economic output. And inflation is measured by the percentage change in consumer prices. Inflation occurs when the price level of goods and services rises. Let us evaluate each country. Option A, Australia. GDP, plus 1.8%, positive growth, so no recession. Consumer prices, plus 1.3%, inflation, as prices are rising. Hence, we see that Australia is experiencing growth, not a recession, and inflation. Option B, Brazil. GDP, minus 2.9%, negative growth, so this indicates a recession. Consumer prices, plus 8.3%, high inflation, prices are rising rapidly. Hence, we see that Brazil is experiencing both recession, negative GDP, and inflation, high consumer price increase. This matches the condition we're looking for. For option C, China. GDP, plus 6.7%, positive growth, so no recession. Consumer prices, plus 2.0%, inflation, prices are rising. Hence we see that China is experiencing growth, not a recession, and inflation. Lastly, option D, Japan. GDP, plus 1.1%, positive growth, so no recession. Consumer prices, minus 0.2%, deflation, not inflation. So, we can conclude that Japan is experiencing growth, not a recession, and deflation, falling prices. Hence, the correct answer for this question is option B, Brazil. Brazil was suffering from both an economic recession, negative GDP growth, and inflation, rising consumer prices. Thank you all so much for watching this video on inflation and deflation multiple choice questions in economics. I really appreciate your support. If you found the content helpful, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your feedback means a lot, so feel free to leave any questions or comments below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.